Everybody, shall we? Good. Welcome to this cabinet meeting. Let's get into the agenda, and we start with apologies for absence. And we have actually 3 cabinet member apologies. We already knew that Councillor Golby was going to be away, and indeed Councillor Breeze. Sad to say that Councillor Dan Lister is not very well at all. We've dragged him to a couple of online meetings, and we can validate that he's extremely poorly. So those 3 apologies to record, please. Does any cabinet member have any declaration of interest that they wish to make in this evening's agenda? No? Okay, thank you. In which case we come on to minutes, and the minutes we have are of our earlier meeting this month, which was the 6th of December. Does any member have any amendments or correction that they want to propose at all? Thank you for proposing that, Phil. Is that agreed? Do we accept the minutes? Agreed? Thank you very much. And just to confirm, we did also go into private session on that to consider the Old Black Line lease arrangement. So I'm confirming agreement to both sets of minutes, please. Thank you. That's good. We have no particular announcements. I'm not been notified of any urgent business, so we'll go on to our first report. This is Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Come back with recommendations in respect of the Children's Trust budget. So if we may, we have the chairman, Ian. If you'd like to introduce this to us, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think there's an awful lot. The report covered it off pretty adequately. I did flag it 2 meetings back at the November meeting that it hadn't got. The only comment I would make is that we do need to try and slick these things up, because this was made in October, when actually arguably it may have had some help with you when you were in the middle of the negotiations on the Children's Trust fee for the incoming year. It was something that we were trying to be helpful on. It almost feels that you've missed the moment because of just whatever internal inertia has meant that we didn't actually manage to get it. I'm particularly disappointed to get it to the beginning of December meeting, given that I had flagged it in November. So I have nothing further to add other than the recommendation is there, and I still think we should be bringing the DFE's attention to this, because it is the structural issue that the costs lie in one place and the responsibility lies in another place, and the two are not connected, where in any sensible structure, those two would have a hard, solid line between them. And that's something I think that needs to be addressed, and it's a massive weakness, because it just allows potential any amount of uncontrolled and uncontrollable spend, and the council is just having to keep writing checks. And I think as a structural point and a point of financial responsibility, it is something that model needs to be readdressed. And to me, the best thing to do is to go back to the people who imposed that model and say, your model, your rules, well, you can pick up the check.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure why the delay. We were happy to have had it earlier. The good news is it had been trailed, if you like, by your comments, so we were aware of the scrutiny situation throughout those negotiations. We knew that was the thoughts. I'll bring in a couple of people. It is one that's addressed to Malcolm because it's a budget issue. Malcolm may want to comment. Certainly, I know that Fiona does. Malcolm, starting with you.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to comment. Thank you very much for that, and I completely agree with you. And we will be writing to them. And I mean, this basic management lesson of responsibility control is fundamental. And I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, that's all. What more can I say?
Very good. Thank you, Malcolm. Just to say, Malcolm, as this evening is very much your show, just move your microphone a bit nearer. That'd be brilliant. But over to Fiona. You wanted to comment on this too.
Thank you. I just wanted to let Councillor McCord know that our DFE representative does sit on our budget meetings with the trust. And a few weeks ago, I can't remember, it might be 4 weeks ago now, we had a meeting in the Cube at Corby. The first of our meetings of discussions for the trust budget. The DfE representative was in the room, and at our interval, I did speak to him about your scrutiny, so they are aware, and we will be doing that following on from this meeting. We will be sending our email to them to let them know our views.
Absolutely. Thank you. So thank you for coming along in, and thank you to the committee for the work they've done on this. Appreciate it. Thank you. Right, that takes us on to the first of the several financial reports, item 7, revenue monitoring, Q2. So this is our, I beg your pardon. Yeah, I beg your pardon. We do need to agree in terms of agreeing to the recommendations. Normally, we just note them and thank the committee, but actually on this occasion, we probably are agreeing to the recommendation. So on that item 6, please, if I may, can I just ask all members to confirm their agreement to the committee's recommendation? Thank you very much. Thanks, Adam. Okay, so coming back to item 7, which is the revenue monitoring. In a moment, we'll hand over to Malcolm to talk us through. We've 3 speakers so far on this one, and they registered in the following order. First is Councillor McCord, then Councillor Harris, then Councillor Stone. I could have saved you the trip and mentioned you were first, Ian, but anyway, over to you. I hadn't looked at the list by then.
Well, again, my gripe with this is not the report. The report's fine, but we're now talking about end of June, and in 10 days' time will be the end of the 3rd quarter. We really need to find a way that these are much quicker, and particularly from speaking as chair of the corporate scrutiny, we've only had Q2. So by the time this would ever come round to corporate scrutiny, the figures are so old and the situation has changed so drastically, as it's debating ancient history. There's nothing we can do to change it. We really need to be getting, particularly at scrutiny, the same monthly MI as Cabinet are getting. Even, I'm not waiting for this. To me, yeah, I can see the progress, fine. You're reporting a slightly improved position, but you should by now already know what period 8 looks like, not period 6, because that finished end of November. And in 10 days' time, period 9 is finished, and we should again be have a good handle on that. So my plea is more about give us timely and up-to-date information, and not be giving us reports about what happened at the end of June, at the end of December. We really need to find a way to do it, and I don't see why we don't get the same monthly management information, financial information that Cabinet get every month as it gets put together. So the report's fine, but you can talk about it all you like. But even all of that, everything has moved on. No matter what question or any comment you wish to make, the answer will be things have now changed because it's already 3 months old.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Ian. We'll respond on that. Should we take the other 2 speakers, Malcolm, and respond? Or did you want to chip in now? You're welcome to. Go on.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Ian, these figures are actually end of October, end of period 7. So just yeah, that's right. Yeah, Q2, that's correct. 6 on 9, it's period 10. We actually put period 7 in, if you notice there. So point just to put that right. Yeah, but dealing with it, I do agree because you got good ideas. So.
Yeah, have we clarified that? So these figures then are end of September, aren't they?
No, they're at the end of October.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Next speaker is Councillor Harris, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo those comments, I think it is end of Q2, but either way, I think it would be useful to have sight, even though myself and Councillor Stone regularly meet with Martin. I think it would be useful to have more regular monthly figures if that's feasible, particularly given the criticality of the budget and the current status. I have 2 specific questions in regard to revenue monitoring. Arguably, they they both slightly bridge it obviously into future also for the budget for the coming year. One specifically, there's been a large amount of activity taking place once there was a high figure overspend flagged, I think, of 58 million at one point. And it's, I was going to say fairly miraculous that we now appear to be predicting that to be zero or near enough zero for the year end. So there's clearly been a lot of activity taking place to review that predicted overspend to get to the point that we are expected to be at the end of the year. I know one of those has been around vacancy. I was going to say putting vacancies on hold, I guess, effectively. I have raised this question before, and it's a specific question about whether we could be provided with information on which of those roles are specifically being held in order to achieve the year-end figure. So that's quite a specific issue, but again, it would be useful to get some insight as to whether there's any impact on any service provision at all. We've been assured that there isn't, but again, it would be good to get oversight and a clear perspective on what that actually looks like. My second question again is largely related to revenue monitoring, but also has a bearing on the future budget, which I'll talk about later on. But it would appear that we've utilised 50.6 million of reserves across all reserve pots to this point in time, or at least predicted year end. So again, would it be possible to get specific detail on how that has been allocated and where that spend has been used? Because obviously it's a significant amount of money, and I appreciate it's come from various different reserve allocations, but it would be useful to have that detail if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think Malcolm wants to chip in. I'd agree with your word miraculous. The challenges and the way that the whole staff team have turned this round has been no stone unturned. So it is genuinely, sincerely miraculous. And I think we'll see even more of that when we look at future for next year. But Malcolm, you want to chip in?
Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah. The 58 million, Jonathan, is actually where we came from in the 23-24 setting the budget. 24. If you look back, best page to look at, if you look at page 140, 141, that shows you the story for this year and also the story for next year. And the 58 came from next year. That's our starting point when we all went like that, see what it was. We actually started with the period 3 figures on 22-23 at 16.8. So you know, it's still a job to do, but the 58 comes from this coming year.
So just if I may, a quick build question on that, that seems quite a big differential between what may have been forecast, even if it was a budget figure, that seems quite a high differential.
58 million is an awful lot of money.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to pick up any other points, Malcolm, or should we got one more speaker?
I'd finish off if you like. On the reserves, yeah, no problem with that, Jonathan. I think that's a very sound question.
On the reserves, yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you. In which case, is Councillor Stone's not with us, I don't think. Oh, sorry, there she is, right in front of me. Danielle, the floor is yours.
Easy to not see.
Not at all, not a bit, not a bit. A camouflaged in
Good
green, that's what
evening.
it was.
I agree with what both my colleagues have said, actually, but I also have some other comments I want to make. When we set this budget, one of the things that my group said is it's a fragile budget, and the pressures within it, the internal pressures, are absolutely enormous. And for me, this is something about a situation that needs addressing, which is our relationship with central government, because it's really clear in the papers, in all the papers, that central government isn't paying enough attention to the needs of local government, in spite of the amount of lobbying that's going on through the LGA, through all kinds of different forums that I'm aware of. And what we really need is a much better settlement for local government. I'm really interested in on 1.5, when we're talking about reducing costs. I'd really like to know what the expectation is around that and how it's happening, because it seems to me it's either going to be staffing or overheads. It can't be overheads, can it? Or there's some magic going on that I don't quite understand. So, you know, we can't be making life more streamlined and more efficient, because we've been doing that for 12 years. So I'd like to know exactly what it is that's helping to reduce costs. We've got an underspend on education, which to me is not a good thing at all. Our children need every penny we've got spent on their education, so I'd like to understand that. With the Children's Trust, I'd like to know if any work has been done looking at how service failure in other parts of the council are contributing to increased costs for the Children's Trust. And I really do think that's a bit of work that, if it hasn't been done, really does need to be done. I think it's really frightening. I heard on the radio coming down, and it's reflected in these papers. And I'd like to thank the officers for their, honesty in the papers about how many children are coming into care because of poverty. That is so shocking. That is so shocking. And the Radio 4 item on it this evening is worth people checking and listening to. I'm really worried about, in the DSG, early years funding. Early years is in crisis, and we ought to be paying far more attention to early years funding. And in particular, because of the changing nature of the demographics in our council area, we ought to be looking at how we support EAL. And there's no provision in the DSG budget for EAL support, and I don't understand that. I note again, we've got a huge issue with recruiting ed psychs, with a considerable loss of service and a considerable loss of income. And I want to know what strategy we've got for addressing that, because it's not a new problem, it's been an ongoing one. And then lastly, I just think I'd like to know what we're doing about leisure services. They cost a lot of money. They're a hugely important part of our offer. And I just wonder if we've got any plans to integrate them and make them probably a bit more efficient.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of things before you go. There might be a couple of clarifications there. I mean, we'll always be honest in our papers. That's absolutely an important thing for us, and to alert early and be honest, as we did this time round, about when we first spotted the real challenges that were coming along. Fiona, I didn't know, did you want to clarify the trust pressures on the trust due to failures elsewhere? I wasn't sure if you felt you might want to clarify something with Danielle as an example or something, or are you happy with what that means? Do you understand? You're happy to pick that up, are you, Anna, in due course? Yeah, okay. Well, answer it now. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Shall we might as well go to you now. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. So I think I mentioned it before. We did a workshop with the Children's Trust, and it was one of a series of workshops that we did for what we call wicked issues, which were issues that crossed several departments or services, and they had an impact on each other. In the children's case, there were two particular ones. So one was care leavers with housing issues. And of course, if we couldn't find them housing, what happens is they end up back in children's in what they call enhanced support, which is a more expensive way of supporting them than obviously finding housing solutions. The other one was transport and issues, particularly where children end up in this cycle of finding transport for children for schools, because you have to wait for their education support plan before you can define the transport they need. They were quite often at the very end of the list of getting the placements and procuring routes for them, which was making them expensive and causing overspends. And those were two of several issues that we picked up with them and went through with them, and we've agreed solutions for. And we've already sort of been working, for example, with the university, and we found a really potentially good solution for care leavers accommodation where we can support them. So, but those are ongoing things we're working with them too. But those were the only two where they specifically had issues that way. We also had some where they could help us too. But there were a whole series of those, and those are ongoing transformational type projects for next year. It might just be worth, if you're happy, sorry, as well, Chair, just to say on the cost-cutting question, the answer to that is there were many, many things, but I think the simplest way to describe it is we had 150 lines of mitigations to help bring down the costs. They weren't just staff savings, and a lot of the staff proposals for recruitment and stuff that we had that we refused. There were lots of exempt roles, as you'd expect, social care workers, high demand roles, whatever we continued with. So these were roles we didn't need to fill, or were admin roles or other roles. But generally they were budgets we didn't need to spend, procurements we could change, contracts we could change, a whole series of just mitigations across every service. They weren't just cost cutting in terms of overhead. So I just thought I'd clarify that too.
Many thanks, Anna. Many thanks indeed. So a few points there. Malcolm might want to pop in. It might be that Fiona still wants to say more on early years or something, but otherwise, and I think you want to come in on leisure, don't you, Adam? So Malcolm, over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. 2 points. Where's Danielle gone? Oh, there you are. Must be blending into the background or something today. I don't know what it is. 2 points there, Danielle, I think that I picked up from there. The first one about central government input. Well, as far as I'm sat here, the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. So that's not a problem to argue that. Now, one question you did ask though, and again, I'd refer you really to page 140 in the report, but is how did we get there? How did it happen? And you and I have known each other for a few years now, and you'll know that every time I sit here and talk about budgets, I always talk about productivity, always talk about productivity. And it comes in many forms. And the situation is at the beginning of this year, we had a finite amount of money. You know, we couldn't do much about that. It was finite. Now, what's happened during the year, of course, inflation has come in, Ukrainian war, goodness knows, all those sort of things, all beyond our control. And that's made the situation rather difficult. We look to me, looking at here, last time we said we would be 7.5 million overspent. This time we're talking 3.75. I would be very disappointed, given that we're going into the last quarter, which when contingencies tend to drop out and things get better. I'll be very disappointed if that didn't balance the books and maybe a little bit better, we'll see. So, and that's all come about from productivity improvement. I mean, an example of Wendy's here, I'll give an example, is the closure of Lodge Road. The situation of moving all the planners together in this building here, and so on and so forth. And there's a whole list of them later on here, but you can only improve your services because you've got a finite amount then by productivity improvements. And we've got to do that again next year. And I'll touch on that here, but you've got to be the 20th time you heard me say that, I'm sure.
Okay.
Other than that, Chair, it's just really to point out that I wasn't going to go into a lot of detail here. There's a massive facts here. The headline number is we've gone from 7.5 down to 3.75 is the prediction at the end of period 7. We would hope to see that improving. Be disappointed if we didn't. And that represents, if you take the net budget, that's just over 1%. If you took the gross budget, it's about 0.5%. So we're thereabouts, and I'm encouraged the way it's happened this year. It's been very, very good. Thank you, Chair. That's all I got to say, I think.
Thank you, Malcolm. Fiona?
Thank you. We are concerned ourselves, Councillor Stone, about the early years provision. We did raise it at the schools forum last week. We will be bringing a paper to the forum at the next meeting to ask them to transfer some of that underspend money in the Direct Schools grant to go to the early years sector, because we are aware that people rely upon the early years sector in order to go to work, and they desperately need that provision. So we're seeing a lot of, you know, the small childminder people are not able to manage on what they're getting at the moment. So those provisions are desperately needed by our families. We are aware of that. But as you will know yourself, the grant is actually monitored and administrated. It's administrated by us, but decisions are made by various representatives from the schools in our district. So we do have to lobby them and say, we would like you to spend more money on this. And if they agree, which we have warmed them up already to agreeing, that we will bring that to the next meeting to transfer some money into the early years sector. So that will take care of the underspend, I imagine.
Thanks, Fiona. Adam?
Yeah, just to answer Councillor Stone's question about a contract consolidation on leisure services, I completely agree that leisure services are vitally important. Obviously, as former district and borough services, we inherited 3 separate sets of contracts to deliver those services. Happily, an opportunity will present itself at the end of March 2026, when contracts in the former Northampton Borough and Daventry district areas both expire. We're currently putting together a leisure strategy for the whole West Northants area, which will guide us through the procurement process for new leisure contract or leisure contracts, for those areas, whichever best suits the needs of residents and taxpayers. So no decisions have been taken, but in the meantime, we see and we understand the pressures felt by the leisure industry. Heating swimming pools in this environment is not an easy task. It's not cheap. So we're in constant dialogue with our partners, looking at ways that we can help them both logistically and financially if appropriate.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. Any other queries at all on this report? Okay, recommendations as always are at section 3. Can I just ask you to confirm your agreement to those recommendations, please? Is it agreed? Thank you. That takes us on to item 8, and for item 8, we have 2 speakers, Councillor McCord and then Councillor Stone, and then we'll go back to Malcolm to highlight some key points. So Ian, you're happy to pass on that one? Lovely. So we're straight to you, Danielle.
Thank you. Again, a report full of detail, and I thank the officers very, very much for producing that. Just a couple of questions. Page 57. I know the Children's Trust raised an issue with us about their buildings, so I just wondered if we've got a budget allocation for addressing some of those concerns, because I think when we're working with very vulnerable families and vulnerable children, we need to make sure the environment we're bringing them into is safe and welcoming, don't we? So that was one question. On the same page, it mentions 106 and Sill, and I just want to know, you'll get bored of all of us asking, I'm sure, until it's done, but have we resolved all the issues around where 106 and Sill is, and do we have a grip on how much we've got and where it is? I'm a bit worried without that being done, if it hasn't been done, how we're going to forward spend on 106 and Sill. So from the papers, it reads as if we're going to put the money in for Sill and 106 expenditure and claim it back when the money comes in. So the question there is, what happens if the money doesn't come in, and does that ever happen? I'm really pleased to see lots of IT development in this paper, but the question for me, is it strategic or is it reactive? I think there's a considerable difference between the two. And then finally, on flood resilience, again, very welcome that we're paying more attention to that, and rightly so. But I think we need to add in the lakes in the Eastern District, don't we? I think they've been very forgotten about and neglected, but they're really important flood defences there. And I think they need to be included in the flood defence strategy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Malcolm, did you want to respond to any comments there? I know Stuart will come in and refer to the Sill points, I think.
Yeah, fine. It just, we're just checking up on the number there. The Children's Trust got about 2.5 million.
Say that again?
2.5 million for the Children's Trust is the number you're looking for.
For the refurbs?
Various schemes. Yeah, well, there's all sorts of, you'd have to get the detail there, Danielle, to know precisely what that is. That's the number. It's not exactly, but thereabouts. Page 66.
Okay.
I'm reliably informed.
Okay. Any other comments from you, or we'll bring, let's bring Stuart in on the Sill and 106. Thanks, Stuart.
In terms of section 106 and Sill money, we've got an improvement plan that is moving forward. We've got a grip of the vast majority of the Sill monies in terms of what we've got, where it's allocated, and what it's there for. There's still some work to do on that in terms of the amalgamating all of the information. So 2/3 of the area we're pretty clear on. The last third is we know where the information is, and we're monitoring that. So in terms of giving assurance that if the money is allocated, identified, it will be allocated and it will be brought into the council. So there is no evidence that any money has been lost through the process. In terms of the lakes, can I just
Feel free if you wish to comment on that too. Yeah.
Well, just that we've been given some funding by the government to look at flood and flood defence and mitigation as we go forward, which looks at some of our key waterways, etc. So there is a piece of work which I'll happily share after the meeting in terms of the extent of that and what we're actually doing in regard to that. But you're absolutely right. Our waterways, our lakes are very much part of the flood defence, and therefore that scheme and that monies will be to bring more resilience into West Northants as we go forward.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Any further comments at all on this item? No, okay, thank you. In which case, as always, the recommendations at section 8, can I ask you to confirm your agreement, please, to those? Section 3, I should say. Thank you very much indeed. Takes us on to 9, which is Treasury Management update. 3 speakers. Again, Ian is first on the list. Then Councillor Harris, Jonathan, and Councillor Beardsworth. Sally.
Thank you, Jonathan. There's not a lot to comment on. I think the report is very clear, and thank you for that. My question really relates to table 1 on page 77. Couple of bits and pieces. Lobo loans. How much do we have out in Malcolm's favourite sucker loan? 78. So when it talks about market Lobo and other, it's all Lobo, because the figure is 78.
You got your microphone on there, Malcolm. Sorry.
Sorry. 150 started off at NCC. We took that down to 94. Then that got split between North and South, and we ended up with about 50. So of that comment there, roughly 50 Lobo loans, and they're going out something like about 30, 40 years, some of them.
And the rate of interest would also be helpful to know the rate of interest and what we're paying on all of these bits and pieces.
There's a schedule that is straightforward. We can get you that.
Yeah. And then the other bit, which I'm just can't quite get my head around on this table, is the figures in brown, or whatever color you want to call that, bronze, where we claim we've made a 4 million repayment of loans, but the figures come down from 344 to 342, which I take to be about 2.3. But then the other figure moves, the forecast outturn moves to 281, which is about 60 odd million. So are we planning a 60 million repayment of debt? Happy to take this offline and take through
I don't know.
at another point. That's fine.
Frankly,
Well, we can take it offline then and go through it. But that was really all. I just couldn't get my head around that table.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I was happy enough with. I did notice some press talk on the use of Qatar. I think we need to be extremely careful as a council in asking officers to go outside of policy and make political judgments and not policy judgments. And it seems to me that whilst some people may not like that, like the use of Qatar, as long as their banks meet our lending and borrowing criteria, then we're within policy. If there's an issue, there's an issue with the policy, which is for members, and not an issue for investments, which is for officers.
let me qualify that now. Might as well. There are 3 basic criteria that we always apply to any of these loans. And the first is this bank solid? Are we going to see our money in the long run? Okay. Second thing is liquidity. You've got to be able to get the money quickly because it's a cash flow argument. Because if you notice, they're all fairly short term. And the third thing, and last down the least, is the rate of interest on it. Now there are Qatar loans, there are other loans all over the world, and these will come up for review. These particular ones relatively early in the new year, and we will review it in our normal manner. And I'll discuss this with Cabinet, and I'll do what the consensus invites me to do. But the current guys in Treasury, they've got a job to do to support the revenue line. So they're doing their best. So they will need to get policy from the Cabinet in due course, if indeed we do change anything. We'll review it. No promises either way at this stage.
Thank you. So our next speaker then, Councillor Harris. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's almost as if Councillor McCord teed that nice DJ link up for me, because personally, you won't be surprised probably to hear me say that I actually do think there is a problem with policy, and I accept the point that investment is operating with current policy. I have no issue with that, but I would urge the Council and Cabinet at some point to review. I fully appreciate that the policy is set out very clearly and it's linked to the SIPFA guidelines, and therefore it's focused on security of capital first, liquidity and yield. But I think there is a discussion and a debate to be had primarily about the issue of socially responsible investment. Now, I know that we can debate that forever, and I'm sure there will be very many different views around this table, let alone around the council. But nonetheless, I would urge the council and the cabinet in particular to have that debate. And if you're looking for contributions from others, I'm sure you will hear them. But I know it's SIPFA guidelines, as I echo, but I would urge the cabinet to potentially focus on that. My reasons are quite clear, really. In our corporate plan, we talk about green, clean and improved life chances. And my focus and my view, therefore, is that shouldn't just apply to the residents and folk of West Northamptonshire. We should be ensuring that those principles in our corporate plan apply to anyone, anywhere, and that includes wherever we invest. And we should not potentially, and I say potentially, very carefully, be selling out other groups of people at potentially the risk of where we invest. So therefore, I would urge that to be the case. I have a second point I'd like to make also. It was announced yesterday that Thurrock issued a Section 114, and I believe Thurrock is one of the councils that we also have some funds invested with. And I guess it's an obvious question, are we assured that the 8 million that's invested is safe and will be returned? My understanding is that there are 249 million pounds, or rather 400 odd million pounds in debt. So it's just a question of ensuring that that is clearly going to be returned. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Malcolm, did you want to pick those points up? I'm happy to comment on.
Yeah, thanks. The first point there was on the investment of Qatar again. You know me well enough now, Jonathan, to know I'm interested in any good ideas. Yeah, any good ideas, please let's have them. We haven't got a monopoly on ideas. I've said it a dozen times, and always interested. But you know, and by all means have your input, and anybody else for that matter. You know, it's got an input. Just bear in mind the situation, you know, and understand the balances that are involved in this, and I'm sure you do. So that's fine. Now, with regard to Thurrock, yeah, we got £8 million invested, 2 loans maturing. Where are we? Maturing in
January, February, March.
one's in June, one's in May of next year. And yes, we do expect to get our money back. This is, as I understand it, this is underwritten by government money, and so I would expect the government to pay up. Thanks, Chair. I think I've answered those two.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm. Just to add to the comment, sorry, my mistake. Those were the January, February, March is Qatar, isn't it? And just to add, I completely agree with Councillor McCall's comment, really, which is about setting strategy. If we set that strategy, we have to take responsibility for it. In February, the council voted Treasury Management Strategy, and Qatar, along with other countries, was listed in that report. We had no objections at that time. Councillors voted to invest money in Qatar. Go back to the February papers and you'll see that. So that's the strategy that was set. And as Ian quite rightly says, in my view, if an officer said, well, I didn't like the look of that country, so I'm afraid I went against your policy, or did similar on any other issue, we would be concerned. So whether we review these things more dynamically, I agree with your comments, particularly, you know, that both you and I are really committed to the sustainability agenda. So happy that we do that with our strategy. And we did something on ethical stuff for the pensions, didn't we? This only cropped up because of the football. Prior to the football, we heard nothing. But I've responded to some of the emails I've had by saying that, but also because we've got scrutiny looking at it. What a great way to do it. That's a dynamic way. I think you might be on that task and finish group. That scrutiny committee has met 3 times. and as yet has not raised any comments about that. So we're really open. We're open to ideas. We welcome them through scrutiny. What I've not heard, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest this, but the TV companies have invested hugely during the World Cup. The sponsors like Coca-Cola have. Our racing teams, many of them are based locally, go off to Qatar and don't take criticism. I think we've got to be really careful, given that the investment money pays for services, to allow staff to have knee-jerk reactions on policy that we've set. But I'm all up for reviewing it and reviewing it more dynamically than we have hitherto. You got like a point that you wanted to raise, Ian? Was that a supplement to your comment?
I was actually just going to raise the point about the section 114 and the loans. To reassure people, when NCC issued their 114 notice, South North Hants had loaned them, I can't remember how much, and people in South North Hants here were worried about it. But bizarrely, through the 114 process, it's still government crown debt. You don't lose your AAA status, and the money was repaid, and you don't doesn't actually impact your credit worthiness. So I don't think we need to be worried about it. It'll still come in because ultimately it's sovereign debt, and ultimately you'll get your money back.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Yeah, that's how I understand it. Again, Malcolm, you're going to chip in, then we've got one more speaker.
Yeah, two more points I'd like to make on this report. And the first is that if you look at the maturity table, that's 10.2. And if you look at that and you look at the capital, which I spoke about earlier, the maturity and the capital expenditure, i.e. the borrowings on capital expenditure, are broadly balanced over the next couple of years. So what that says from here is that we're controlling borrowing, controlling borrowing. Second thing I wanted to point out was that it was asked some time ago about the pension fund, and there's a note in 7.2, second bullet point there. The fact that the government Bank of England had to bail out pensions. When I was asked about that, about the pension that we look after, and the fact is that no, we had no problems. These are the reason was they're called LDIs, which are effectively derivatives or swaps, as they're known colloquially, and we haven't got any of those at all, so we were never affected. You'll be interested to know that our pension fund is currently 130% covered. So that's pretty good. So you can rest assured on that. Those with the pension. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Malcolm. One last speaker. Sally, have your points been covered, or you?
Points have been covered. Thank you very
Brilliant.
much, Chair.
Thank you. We haven't got you on the list, but go on, seeing as we. Excellent.
I've been chairing the Treasury Management Scrutiny Group, so you're right. We have made a comment that we're satisfied with processes, but we also noted that we don't have an ESG strategy, environmental, social and governance strategy, which is in the making. And we have been promised it will be presented during the budget making meeting in February. And I think that's really, really important because Councillor McCord is perfectly right. This is a political decision that needs to be made, governed by policy. For the officers to play out on our behalf. And of course, ethical investment is really, really important. Now, there's no guarantee ever that we will understand everything that is going on in the world and always make the right decisions, but having that framework to help us make those decisions, I think is really, really important and will be a step forward. And, you know, the point that you made about us voting in the way we did at full council is a reflection on how difficult it is for councillors to always understand all the detail. And really, we do rely quite a lot on officers to flag up, and they do mainly, where the contentious issues might be. Not that people like me have got any control over any of that, but it's good to know and to understand how decisions get made. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that piece of work's going well. We look forward to having that in place, and absolutely no problem with that. I think it's an important thing to have to guide day-to-day decisions, isn't it? Okay, that's great. I think that covers everybody. On that report, as always, the recommendations are at section 3. Can I just ask you to confirm your agreement? Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay. Takes us on to item 10, which is regarding transformation, local government reform, savings and so on. three speakers on this one. First one is Councillor McCord, then Councillor Beardsworth, then Councillor Randall. Ian, over to you.
Thank you again. Firstly, I'm happy to see this report. It's good, at least, and the report at least acknowledges the fact that people like myself and others have been crying out for this type of information to come to us. I do take a little bit of issues to some of the things that we're putting down as transformation as to where there actually are transformation. To me, that needs to be doing things and grasping opportunities, and I still think there are opportunities that are being missed. Take a very obvious one. So planning is moving into this building, but highways is not coming with it. Now, to me, one of the things with the the thinking is clearly, let's put together three former district services, but we keep district services as district services, but we don't seize the opportunity to put together what would have been complementary former county services with it. And that's where, you know, if there was a more ambitious plan, you could begin to pick up those opportunities. And I'm sure there are others, but that to me is just a very obvious one that's not happening. It's disappointing to see, but not surprising, that the Northampton First focus, as stated on page 104, is very clear. You know my views on that. I've made it clear. It's just rather interesting to see it. At least it's a bit more honest now to see it in writing. The bit which I am a little concerned about, and it's, so just want to look at the figures on page, well, I think they're actually they're stated in a couple of bits, they're stated in the covering report. So on page 89, 90 and 91. So we have efficiencies and figures that have been put in various categories. What my concern is the figures in the column for 23-24, the incoming year, which in some instances look ambitious, if not heroic. You know, just redesign an organization. We've done 830 in the first year, 2021, 2.7 million in this year, and we're hoping for the thick end of 14 million next. You know, a similar story. Technology, 71,000 going to 190, and suddenly we're going to do 8 times better at over 1 million. And again, policy and process going from 260 to 106,000, and then bingo, we're going to do 20 times better, or 18 times better at 106,000 is going to move to 1.8 million. Certainly, when we get into scrutiny of the budget, I will certainly be asking for a bit more depth on that. So I'll put cabinet members on notice on that. So these numbers just raise an eyebrow with me, that we can actually manage to deliver at that, you know, at 18, 20 times better than what we've done for the previous 2 years. And is that doable, and how is it going to be done? Because it just seems, as I say, ambitious to say the least, if not heroic.
Perhaps I'll just comment on a few of those. The whole true transformation bit, I get that. Part of what's happened in the last few months as we've developed this report is we've been making these massive attempts to reduce costs for next year. So it has become savings as well as true transformation. So I understand, and we often talk about the definition of that. That's fine. A lot of what's in here is blunt savings, really renegotiated contracts, which don't have any transformation magic in them, but they're just pushing for more efficiencies, really. The highways thing, I'll check, but I think they're due to move, frankly. That's it. Did you want to comment on that quickly, Phil? Just confirm that, or Stuart, maybe?
Just to say, it was never intended that the whole of the highways would come here. But highways planning officers are hopefully going to be moving in here. We're still talking about it, but the planning team that sits within highways will be coming here. That's something that we know goes on in other highway authority, in other authorities, and during the peer review with the senior planner from Shropshire Council, that was very much supported, and that's what we're considering at the moment.
Yeah, my point is a proper thought through plan wouldn't have been hopeful and thinking about and doing it. It would have been part of that whole move in the round to have garnered that opportunity.
Stuart wants to chip in. Oh, do you, Stuart? Sorry, I took it as you did, but maybe you just no, you don't have to.
I'm happy to take that offline with Councillor McCord and talk
Yeah.
about the vast transformation processes that have gone into planning.
Yeah.
That will make that a more efficient service. And I think to pick one small element of that is perhaps a little out of context, shall I say? But again, I'll pick up with Councillor McCord. More than happy to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe what we'll do, we'll see what other points we get from other speakers and come back, and we might want to go around the table a bit more on some of the projections of delivery. Just to mention on the Northampton First, I think looking at that, I think that's about offices. We know that we didn't think we're getting the best use out of Daventry office. We've gone where we have done with this. We're sitting here and we have every cabinet meeting in Toaster. This is an excellent building. It's going to be used more and more and more than it ever was, with increasing, public health and various other services delivering out of it. Not quite sure he's saying this, but you also know that intentions, I think, are expressed here to reduce our use of the Angel building, get other people in to cover the cost of that. And to make effective use of the Guildhall. Wolverhampton is the county town. It's got those offices in. I'm not sure if what you're saying is sell the Guildhall building. That'd be a good one to nail your flag to, or whether it's just a divisive way of trying to create differences between a culture that's actually becoming a one West Northants culture. I don't think either are terribly effective, really. We're doing what we're doing to reduce costs and serve people at the best possible rate. And that's every single member of our 425,000 population, whatever part of West Northants it's in. That's an absolute principle to those that are in the centre of shaping West Northants. Shall we move on to our next speaker, which is Councillor Beardsworth? Sally.
I'm going to stay here. Is that all right, Chair?
Yeah, go on. Yep.
I agree with the report. I think the report's a good one, and it also gives a lot more information than we've had before. I always think transformation is such a strange word to use, though, because we're not really transforming. What we're trying to do is provide a better service and a more efficient service for the taxpayers of Northampton. And I think when you look at some of the things that we've inherited, like the home to school transport, that definitely needs a total transformation to make it a better service for children and people using the service. There's a lot that's been done to improve. I would like to see how it's improving, the efficiencies have improved services rather than cutting down costs, because services are just as important as saving money and a transformation. So I would like to see a little bit more of that. It says you've got a reduction in senior staff costs as council's amalgamated, but it doesn't say by how much or who we've lost or what expertise have we lost. Those are the sort of things that I would be interested in. And maybe I can meet with somebody who's written the report and get that information. Thank you, Chair.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure we'd necessarily list all of the people who are no longer with West Northants because they've chosen to change their career and what their expertise and favourite hobbies were and everything else. But I think what you can say is the show's on the road, services are improving, KPIs are improving, and these are the savings made. We've probably got some wider points to make. I've got a feeling Anna wanted to did you just want to chip in on that, Anna, or should we sweep up? Yeah, go on.
It's just said the specific thing on the senior one was the bringing together of the councils. So it was 8 chief execs down to 7 and all those directors. So these are the senior roles that disappeared right at the very beginning, not stuff that we've taken out since we've been West Northants. Yeah.
In other words, it refers to those roles that are known, the chief executives at the other councils and so on. Yeah, yeah. What our speaker, Councillor Randall, Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me for having my phone. My papers only arrived this morning, and it's really difficult to go through a lot of those looking at on the laptop. So that's why I'm quickly skimming through. So I apologise for that. But that is one of the departments that what we've done is we've outsourced. We seem to have outsourced a lot of our services. I wanted my cabinet papers last week. Couldn't have my cabinet papers last week because we've outsourced them. So like I say, they've arrived today. I would have thought it would have been, quite a simple task just to print them off on our photocopier. They're not stapled together now, so I could have had them loose. I appreciate that this was always going to be a really hard job. I think all the councils have been taking a cut for the last 12 years. And some of the issues that we see now that we hear about that they're hereditary from other councils, a lot of the councillors were on the county council at that time then, when we were in a dire situation. So when they knew things like transport, send transport was an issue back in the county council days, why is it still an issue now? Why wasn't it something that was being picked up on then? So I find a lot of these things quite difficult to understand. Going through all those papers, Councillor Longley spoke about, the closure of Lodge Road. And now I'm seeing that it's likely that we're going to look at marketing off County Hall. I'd never stepped foot inside part of County Hall. I'd only ever been there when I've been outside with a billboard campaigning against a loss of a service. But Roger gave me a tour around that building, and it is beautiful. And I feel that we could have retained part of that building and opened it up to the public. We've got those beautiful courtrooms. We've got the lodges. It's just beautiful. So it really would sadden me to see that and our heritage, just be sold off. I understand that that building, cost us a huge amount of money. But in those papers, I never see it split down actually into how much each building is costing us and where we're getting that income in and best income renting space out. Lodge Road will be due to close its doors in March. I don't know if we've got a buyer for that building yet, but if not, I assume that it's still going to cost us some money to run. Otherwise, it will just be closed up and left to rot and will devalue, I assume. So, reading all through those services, Office has done a great job on saving, but what does that mean actually to our residents? 12 years of cuts residents have seen. And how are we measuring that? Are some areas, is the town receiving better services than, say, the rural part? So, how do we measure? Do we do a survey to ask customers whether services have maintained or whether they've improved? Just, how do we monitor that? I just do not see how we can keep taking cut after cut every single year and maintain our services, because if so, residents are going to be saying, what have you been doing with all the money then? If you can manage it at the same now, what have you been doing for the last 12 years? Where has all that money gone? You could have saved us millions and had a lot better services for our customers a long time ago. So, for officers, I appreciate all the work that they're doing. But from central government, cut on cut, it's hitting us all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just make a few comments generally about the report. I think on the papers, it's a shame, isn't it? I think the key thing is, and you illustrate some things that are really important. I think probably the reason why we do what we do with the papers is because if it works out 10p cheaper per set of papers, we'll do it. We'll do absolutely everything to save money. And I've little doubt you see people in the office who try desperately hard not to print a single sheet of paper. And if they do, they feel like it's a sin if they print anything in colour. We are so careful with every single penny. And I would bet it was a really careful exercise that Democratic Services carried out and found that it was ultimately cheaper for those that wanted a paper copy for us to outsource the provision. I've little doubt about that, and it might not be millions of pounds, but it's just an attitude of saving at every opportunity. Of course, since these papers were published, we've had 2 days of postal strike, and I think that's probably had a significant impact on it. 14th and 15th were postal strike days, weren't they? So I suspect that might be a key part of that delay. We're very familiar with County Hall. Beautiful building, know it well, and an important part of the county and the town of Northampton's history, and that's why we're thinking very carefully about what needs to be done. And some of the thoughts and possible uses are around making the best of that history and the beautiful court buildings that are there. And it sounds like you had the tour that include the cells downstairs and so on. We've got to absolutely do the best we can. But on Lodge Road, I'm not sure we're looking for a buyer really, and I think it's wrong to say the building will rot. I think that's emotive language that suggests there'll be a problem there. It won't. It is a valuable asset, but what we don't necessarily need as much is the capital receipt. What we need is the income, and so the proposal is for rental. And my understanding is that there is a reasonable level of interest, which should see us find the right occupier for that. So that's good, because if you remember, it was more rather than the possibly of 3 or 4 million quid receipt. It was more about annual income, and the difference will mean £1 million saving, £500,000 saving, which will help cover £500,000 worth of services and so on. In terms of how do people know we haven't cut services, you know, when you look hard enough, you can continue to find savings, and this report maps all those out. I don't think we need to do a survey with members of the public. I think members of the public put their faith in their councillors, and that's why we have a cabinet, and that's why we have public cabinet meetings, while we have scrutiny and so on. And every penny of what has changed is here in the budget. We also know that all parties have had briefings with the head of finance, with Martin, and can ask any possible questions. So the faith is in the councillors to ask those questions. And I absolutely know, partly because of his integrity and partly because of our policy, you'll get complete honesty from Martin in any briefing or any of the finance team on where any savings have been made. A few general comments just to highlight that the report, a lot of it's already been mentioned too. I think briefly what it shows is we're less than 2 years old as a council, but I think we have achieved a great deal against the continuing backdrop, the tail end of COVID, that still has some income impacts for us, incidentally. We've got really high inflation. We've got huge or growing demand for many services. And of course, during that time, we've seen, you know, invasion of Ukraine, and we've seen the Afghan situation. And above all, we've seen the additional work that this council and more so the residents of West Northants have shown compassion in welcoming communities, resettlers, refugees, and so on. We've obviously had a huge logistical, cultural challenge, bringing together 3,000 staff, 800 different systems, 4 main office buildings, and over 1,000 contracts from across our 4 predecessor councillors. Despite all that, we have maintained good performance across the corporate measures and KPIs, and those are reported to this cabinet on a quarterly basis, and suggestions from any member of the council on new KPIs that can be introduced are generally accepted and appear in the reports. So we're happy to measure and report on what you want us to measure and report. Obviously, the local government reform originally was anticipated to achieve total savings of £86 million per year. And throughout the whole run up to unitary, that's the figure that we were continually chasing. And that was by merging the 8 different councils into two unitaries. Some of those savings were things that Anna's just referred to, like the savings from senior staff costs, consolidating contracts, rationalising buildings, etc., etc., etc. £52 million of these were delivered in the final year of the legacy councils before we went live, or before vesting day. That left 34 million split between the West and the North councils, with each council therefore needing to find 17 million over the first 3 years to deliver on that initial pledge of the £86 million savings. What we've done is we believe we've exceeded the savings target inherited when we replaced Daventry, Northampton, South Northampton, and half of the county. So we delivered 6.6 million of savings in 21-22. In 22-23, we're on target to deliver 14 million savings. 23-24 on target to deliver 31. I might ask for some clarity around what appears like an accelerating rate, which Councillor McCord highlighted. It might be that Anna can comment on that, or somebody else, or we come back to you. We still have to work across the following themes. These are the main themes: redesign and service alignment to reduce operating costs and improve processes. So many services have been brought together, and we're now using common systems and that kind of thing. That's happening in all areas of the council. In the next 2 years, 2 of our biggest services, revenue, benefits and housing, will be transformed by consolidating systems and adopting far more common processes across the whole piece. We'll progress our new operating model for corporate services, which is important. And we'll complete our office rationalisation. It's aimed by the end of 2023. So property costs, taxpayer money going into office accommodation and property costs is reduced as far as it possibly can be. Demands and prevention to stop people escalating into crisis and costly interventions. Under that heading, the integrated partnership, the ICS, the local area partnerships are established. They've already gained some national recognition, and we have new public health framework in place as well. That's helping to prevent people get to acute crisis. We'll continue our work and focus on well-being, reducing poverty, targeting inequalities. We'll also build on our work in avoiding adults' hospital admissions and grow early year help in residents, which was raised earlier. We've also launched our temporary housing and homelessness transformation plans as well. On buying and commissioning, what's happened is we have consolidated many contracts across things like facilities, energy, adult services and IT. Next year, we'll be progressing some significant new procurements, including our home care contract, children's care, home to school transport and progressing on things like waste. Looking for opportunities to combine health and care contracts also to get more economies of scale. Final heading here is technology and innovation. We've already reduced our IT contracts and our applications by a total of 300 different IT applications. Next year, we will progress significant new infrastructure implementation, including a new telephony system, which will give greater flexibility to our workforce, a full IT refresh, and new systems in customer services, revs and bends, planning, and our legal areas. What we're really proud of is the staff and the track record and how determined they've been to get better wherever we fall short. So we continue to seek to get better wherever we fall short. My mistake. We'll continue to drive transformation and deliver our stated ambitions set out in a corporate plan in 2021. We developed a strong culture around the councils. I firmly believe that's true. I believe we've had every member of staff keen to do the best they can and deliver these efficiencies. These efficiencies and the 150 management actions that Anna referred to, for example, have only come by buy-in throughout our team's grades and not just from some sort of top-down message. So I think that culture is good, and that's that culture that's around the Thrive values that we stick to. We've been working collectively to overcome every challenge thrown at us, and you could not get a better example of that than the organisation pulling together to turn around a 57 million projected budget overspend for next year to a balanced budget. That was key comments from me that sweep up some of the points made. I don't know if anybody wants to add. Anna, was there anything that cropped up there that you wanted to comment on further in addition to what you've said so far?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, really, in terms of obviously the budgets and your point about the escalation and the scale of savings and everything else. So there is an absolute link in all the budget detail that you can come back to each of those headings and see what's in them. But I can assure you, we have a transformation board in place, as you would imagine. It's been running for a long time. We're already tracking and pushing and implementing things which are in next year's budget. We've started very early. We make sure that we're on top of them. So it's not a question of, sort of hoping that they'll all come true later on. We've done a lot of challenge sessions on them, and we've got a separate robustness session on them, but we're already tracking all the risks and the deliverables on them. So certainly Martin's feeling, confident that we're ahead of the game on that for next year's savings, and then you'll be able to obviously pick that up in scrutiny. So just to add that point, thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Any further comments at all on this item? No? Okay, great, fantastic. Everything on this report is to note, of course, and just also an insurance. I think we'll bring back further monitoring reports on this. I think it's important to monitor. So we will bring back further reports and try and follow a similar format that gives you the same level of information. Most of the recommendations are to note the different aspects of this. Can I just ask you to confirm your agreement, Cabinet, please, to the recommendations? That agreed? Great, fantastic, thank you. We move on to item 11, 3 speakers again. Councillor McCord is our first, then Councillor Harris, Councillor Beardsworth, and Councillor Stone. So in a moment, we'll go over to Malcolm, but first of all, Ian, over to you for item 11.
Arguably the main course.
Yes.
Well, thank you. And firstly, I'm sure that we'll start on a point of agreement. Can I, on behalf of scrutiny, put on the record my thanks to Martin, Audra, James, and the whole team that will have the internal factory, who will have been busier than Malcolm putting together the he just reads the proofs. Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, you just read the proofs. Who will have actually helped put together the budget that you're proposing. We will be meeting as scrutiny early in January. The one point that I will make now is that I really think that we should be working more collaboratively in getting a budget. To present it as a done deal and said, don't you worry, you're pretty little heads about it, we've sorted it all out for you, is not really, I think, the sort of the way in which it should be done. I think some of the areas, and the committee will obviously decide where it's going to go, but I think some of the areas I've already highlighted about that transformation, and I take what Anna says, but we're 6 million off on the figures that were in the earlier reports from various savings initiatives. So this is even more ambitious. So again, if you fail to deliver on roughly a third, which is what we feel, which we have highlighted in the red column on the previous reports that we've just dealt with, we need to be worried about the stability and robustness of it. I'm particularly raised an eyebrow on fees and charges. And I just wonder what sensitivity analysis has been done on some of these things, because doubling a charge doesn't necessarily mean doubling the income if you haven't made any allowance for behavioral change. Particularly disappointing to see that green bins are going to be whacked by another 35%. It's bad enough that we're double charging residents to empty their bin without double charging them again and again. And I'm sure we will get the figures on where we're at with the reduced tonnage in the first year of charging in South Northants, but it's been significant as to the tonnage not collected from the first in the first year of charging. And are we sure that we're not going to be seeing more people not doing it and disposing it by other methods that we may not necessarily agree with? I think too, there's been a lot of talk about the supposed 57 deficit, but I think we need to always bear in mind that those figures are based on the assumptions, and as the picture clears, the assumptions clear. And at a stroke, you can write off 25 million when you get told that business rate reset is not going to happen. At a further stroke, you can write off another 20 million when you get an autumn statement that says we're going to help fund various parts. So I think the real bit that we were grappling with is probably the 14, 15 million that we come down to. Although I don't criticize the fact that until you're told business rate reset isn't happening, the prudent thing to do is to make the assumption that business rate reset will happen, and therefore that's a 25 million pound potential cost. But and I also heard, and certainly some rumours around possibly giving indications on a 2-year settlement. I'm not quite sure. Did we get a 2-year settlement? The figures came out yesterday. They talked about and again talked about kicking that can of business rates down the road, which should help at least give us a bit more stability then for the following 2 years, which will make budget setting a little more stable and not quite the yo-yo effects that we managed to get. But I'm sure I look forward to getting into this in much greater detail with the committee and everything else. But for now, that'll give you some idea of when not be you, Malcolm, but others turn up to committee. I think give you a flavour of some of the areas where I suspect the committee will want to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Next speaker, Councillor Harris. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just echo the comments that Councillor McCord made. Always thanks to Martin. He makes a huge amount of time in terms of obviously all the work that goes into budget preparation with his team, but also in terms of availability and answering queries. So as always, my thanks to him for that. No doubt he will be getting quite a few more over the coming few weeks, I suspect. There are a few points I'd like to specifically refer to. And again, it's already been referred to. There's a huge amount of detail to get into, which obviously we will be doing over the next few weeks. But there are a couple of points I'd like to specifically raise in relation to the budget. The first one is in regards to the excellent work that's been going on to explore and look at emissions for the council, which is in draft format, which many of you will be aware of. Within that draft document, it refers to the fact it gives a timeline and indication roughly of a reduction if we're to hit the 2030 net zero target, which the council's committed to, of something like 2,587,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent each year for the next financial year. So again, I've not obviously had the chance to go into huge amounts of detail, but I'd like to get an indication of whether we are factoring in any budget for that purpose, because obviously there's going to be, I'm sure, some requirement for investment if we're going to reduce our own emissions, which is the objective of the net zero target. And if it's the case that it's spread across different budgets, I think it would be extremely useful to see that summarised in one place so that we can monitor and understand both the impact and improvements that that investment might set out. A particular issue for me locally, and I know this was highlighted and flagged in the budget last year, but it's disappointing to see the bus subsidy reduction. We know that that presents potentially a risk to 8 subsidised routes, including specifically 5960 in my own ward, which for many is a lifeline. And I would say that, you know, buses in particular, many people rely on those, and I would hardly call it levelling up to remove them. I would urge the administration to review and consider. I personally know that obviously subsidised buses are not the long-term answer, and there is a bus review taking place at the moment, but at this stage, we have no alternative proposals coming forward. So I will be asking at least for a delay on any decision relating to that if it's at all feasible. And of course, this route is a Market Harborough to Northampton route, which includes some of the key villages in my ward, including Clipston, Welford, Hillsborough and Cretan, to name a few. I've already raised this at the Bus Service Improvement Group. Councillor Larratt will be aware of my views fully on this, and I think that that working group needs to be renamed for sure, because at the moment it's anything but bus service improvement. And the final area I'd like to just relate to is the community grant scheme. It's not very clear at the moment at first glance is to see exactly what the community grant figure looks like for the coming years. So I wonder if I could get some clarification on what that looks like in the proposed draft budget compared to this year's. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed. Sally is next. Councillor Beardsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, unfortunately, with the postal strike, my papers came late. I actually got them an hour before I came to the meeting tonight, so only had a cursory glance. I do have some concerns about the budget is going to be going up to, understand, 4.99, yet a lot of the charges are going up 10, 12, and some more than that. And I'm just wondering how we're going to explain to the general public they're paying more council tax, and yet their charges are going up as well for things that they use, like sports centres, hiring for weddings, all those sort of things. Because I think they're, you know, it's a big jump for them in this particular climate we're living in, the cost of living. So I do have some concerns. I haven't been able to find yet about the voluntary sector, about funding for the voluntary sector. I hope that's had an increase. I'm not sure if it has, but I'm hoping it has, because the voluntary sector saves the council millions of pounds by looking after people that we don't have time or the expertise to do. So I really hope that the voluntary sector is remembered in this time because of the excellent work they do. And also I've got here, disability facility grants. It's got a figure for South Northants and Northampton, but it has nothing in the 2003-04 budget. I know they're grants. We've got an aging population and we want to keep them at home as long as we can. So the more we have that they can get disability facility grants, the longer they'll be able to stay in their home. And there is a slight problem with occupational therapists at the moment getting out to see people in a reasonable length of time. We've had, I had a gentleman phone me the other day to say he has lost his hearing and his sight almost, but he's got a wife and he's looked after. But all the occupational therapists had was his name and his date of birth. They didn't know his home situation, and it was 15 weeks before they could come out and see him. And he said, I'm okay, I've got my wife. But what if I was an amputee? What if I was somebody that didn't have any support? How do they assess that? And I think that's something I was going to raise with Stuart, but he's not here tonight, but I can tell his other lady here. But it is a worry when you have these things. I appreciate some of the charges have to go out, but we must be careful how we do that, because often if you put charges up too much, it has a backfire effect that people don't use them, and therefore you lose your money in the first place. So I will be going through this with a fine-tooth comb. And again, thank you to Martin and his team for the amount of time he's given us to, and we do appreciate it. And I know there'll be further questions because we've only just got the documents. But as I say, it is something you've got to explain to the people of Northampton with a huge hike in council tax at this time and the increase in charges.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sally. Finally, Councillor Stone, Danielle.
Thank you. A few questions and a couple of comments, if I may. I've read the draft budget. Are we going to have information about how the budget is aligning with the corporate plan as we did last year? Very, very useful information, and I think we need it. In terms of the corporate plan, we're saying that we want to be clean and green, but we're still not saying we need to be safe. Yet we know that particularly for women and for children, their feeling is a lot of the time they're not safe. So I think we really ought to be incorporating that into our plan, and we ought to be incorporating ameliorations to that in the budget. Are we going to be showing social value in the budget? I know that must be a pretty hard thing to do, but I think it would be a very worthwhile thing to do, because council tax is going to be going up by 6% altogether, isn't it? With the PCC and the parishes and the town councils. And people are going to rightly be asking us, well, what am I getting for it? You know, we're making cuts and efficiencies and we're doing this and we're doing that, but people aren't going to necessarily feel the value coming back to them from council tax. And the other thing I wanted to say about that is we over rely on council tax, don't we? What I would like to see is an income generation strategy where we're not just putting on charges and making people we care about pay even more. We need to be bringing new money in. And I'll give you an example of something. We should have been applying or helping our partners apply for the Youth Investment Fund. There's lots and lots of money in that. And we've got little voluntary organisations having to do that by themselves without the support I feel they need from us. So, and that's just one example. There's loads of other examples about money that we should be bringing in to the council to offset the pain of having to levy such a high council tax. I'm really worried about the reason why. You explained to me the reason why we're not doing any equalities impact assessments. I've just read the law on it, and it is the law that we have to do it. Instead of which we're having community impacts which don't tell us anything. But I think all our work that we need to do, we need to know what the outcome is for different demographics, and we need to know what the impact assessment is, for example, of a high council tax rate. At the moment, we've got a very good collection rate. I think it's 98.2%. That's very, very high. Is the forecast when it goes up by such an amount that we're going to be able to maintain that? Or is there a big risk that that's going to be much reduced? I note that in this year's budget, we've saved money because of delayed planning, delayed developments. I just think in next year's budget, that's going to come back to bite us because costs will be increased, where we've employed consultants to help us scope present day work for the present day environment. If the environment changes, that work will have to be rescoped, and that will be a waste of those consultancies. So I do think, you know, what we've got in front of us shows a huge amount of very thoughtful work, but I think there's still an awful lot more that needs to be done. And the last thing I wanted to ask you is, can we have some assurance that all eligible properties in West Northants are paying the business rates? I'm thinking about, in particular, St Edmund's Hospital that hasn't paid business rates for 20 years. And that might be one of the reasons why that land is still undeveloped. But there must be lots of other examples. And I'm just wondering, you know, we've got huge pressure on the budget. We need to make sure that people wriggling out of their business rate obligations isn't, you know, going against us.
Okay, quite a number of points there. Should we start? Malcolm, did you want to sweep up any particular points that were raised by our speakers?
Yeah,
There may be others who want to chip in.
Gladly cover those best I can. I'll start off with Ian. Absolutely correct, Ian. The staff we've got here is as good as I've ever come across, top to bottom. So, yeah, Martin, that's another beer you owe me. That's I will start by saying that you talked about the 6 million and the, well, as you call it, heroic. No budget is without risk. This has got risk in it, this budget. There's no doubt about that. And starting where we did, it has risk, and I'll come to that a bit later on when I come to sum up. And I think that's what you can say about that. You could never put the savings in, or I hate to call it productivity programs in. I don't like use with transformation. It's not transformation, it's productivity, and that's key to it. But the only things you can do in a budget is you can put the prices up, you can get a better settlement, your productivity, and the three things you can do: price, productivity, and volume. Volume's going up, so that works against us. Price and productivity are two key items, and that's what we need to concentrate on. The fees and charges, yeah, there's always the behavioural thing. So will it go up? Will it go down? Again, we've tried to put the fees and charges, increase them where people have a choice. They use them or they don't use them. And if they don't want to use them because of the price, then they don't have to. Now, that's a view we've taken, right or wrong, we'll see. And again, the other point you made was going from 58 million down. Yeah, you start taking out business rates and there's a big lump out straight away, and it does sort of go down to about somewhere between 10 and 20, and then you go through. Well, we've gone through a very robust program here. So what we call the star chambers, very detailed, and department by department. And I've got to give credit to the staff. The directorates, they've really come across, and they've come up with some very, very good programs. And we'll see where we go. Jonathan, emissions budget. Yes, there is one. It's a range of things, as you rightly pointed out. And I'm sure if you come and have a chat, people will tie that down more for you. The buses, well, that's always a difficult one, isn't it? And I think that the working group has got that, so I'm not going to comment on that because I haven't got enough knowledge on it. And we're moving over to Sally there. You know, you pointed out the behavioural issue again. Will it actually pay off or will it not? But the price is too high, you get less, and it's a declining situation. We will see. We will see. But we've had to balance the books, and that's what we've done. And then we move on to the increases for Danny Elman pointed out. If you look on page 153, you'll see what the increases are for the various areas, that it excludes parish councils, etc. It's strictly what we're controlling. And of course, you've got Daventry gone up because it's the last year of the 3-year program where we evened out. So Daventry gone up more than 4.99, and that won't be the case next year. South Northampton done the same, 5.35 in their case, but of course Northampton has gone down, so that's 4.27. So that's the last of those 3 years. There was a big debate at the time. I remember it very well. Should we do the whole thing in 1 year, which on reflection we should have done, or should we do it over 3 years? And it was agreed 3 years, so that's where we are. So that's the answers on as best I can on those comments.
Sorry, Malcolm, so through you, Chair, can you answer about the community grants, the disability grants and the voluntary sector? They were the two ones I haven't sorted out.
You did, Sally, and I'm going to have to refer that back to offline because I don't know is the answer. And the settlement you see before you, I'm not going to go into great detail about this because it's all there. It's the initial settlement as devised prior to the final settlement, which, as you rightly said, came out yesterday. So this doesn't include the details that came out yesterday. We're not particularly aware of a material change, but Martin and crew are working through it, and as soon as they've got through it, then that will change if where appropriate. So So I'm not going to go through. What I do say to you all is do look through it, welcome all the ideas, chuck them at us, and you want more detail, please ask, and we'll do the best we can. It is a consultative document. That's what it's designed to, and hopefully the more people that participate in that, the better. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. A few other comments to come in, but Anna, I think Martin, actually, there was a couple of things that Malcolm mentioned there that you were going to sweep up, I think. Then we'll go to Anna if we may. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's just a couple of technical points I wanted to pick up on, really. The first one was from Councillor McCord, who picked up about, is it a 2-year settlement or not? It's not a 2-year settlement. What they gave us yesterday was in the autumn statement, and yesterday was an indication of what is likely to happen in 24-25. So they gave us a much bigger hint for 24-25 than they've given us in previous years, particularly in relation to council tax increases. So they indicated that they could go up by another 5% in 24-25. And at this early stage, they also highlighted they're unlikely to reset the business rates baseline for that year. So we can begin to factor that in with a bit more certainty. And that would impact on, certainly on the figures that we highlight in the medium term financial plan, which is on page 157. So that table on page 157, those figures will need to update to take into account the potential increase on council tax and the fact that the business rates baseline is unlikely to be reset for 24-25. Coming to some of the other comments, aligning into the corporate plan. Yes, we did that through the scrutiny process last year. So we haven't done that as part of formulating the budget plans for this year at this stage. We did that through the scrutiny process. So if that's the desire of the scrutiny committee to do that again, then it's something that we'd look at that point in time. Social value was mentioned. We can't cast the budget completely to social value, but what we can say is we've progressed significantly on how we record and how we identify the amount of money we're putting into social value. So we've now got an approach where we look at the major contracts when they come up. We try and identify how much of that relates to social value, and we're beginning to capture that cost. So we're certainly progressing on that front. We couldn't recast the whole budget so that we reflected social value throughout the budget, but we're certainly progressing on that point. Equality impact assessments. All the proposers have had an initial screening done for equality impact assessments. We've got an overarching equality impact assessment that's been filled out. It's not an appendix we've included, but I'm more than happy to circulate that so that members can have a look at it. I think as part of the initial screening, there was 3 proposals that were highlighted that we'll have to do a full assessment on. So we'll do that as part of the work between draft and final budget. So picking up on that point. And then the final point was just on business rates. And I think we provided information previously about St Edmunds Hospital. The VOA, the Valuation Office, haven't brought into the rating list yet, so therefore we can't levy business rates on it. I think there is always an opportunity for members to be our eyes and ears. So if there are areas of businesses where you think that looks like it's derelict or it looks like it's been brought back into use and should be paying business rates, we want to hear about that because we're very keen to make sure we maximise business rates. So if there are particular sites where members have a particular concern, please make us aware of that, and we'll certainly pursue them and make sure we are either levying business rates against them or understanding the reasons why we're not. So they were the points I wanted to pick up on, Chair. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Martin. That's really helpful. Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Just to Sally's point, the DFG actually is a grant that comes to us via health and through the Better Care Fund. Typically, the last couple of years, it's had a 5% uplift, but we won't have got that yet. It's not something we set. We just get given a determination and then it comes through there, but normally in the new year. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. Adam.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on a couple of the comments made about increases in council tax and charges. I think it's important to point out that everyone sat around this cabinet table is by virtue of being a local taxpayer, subject to these increases in fees and charges. And Councillor Bearsworth said that we need to explain to the people of Northampton why the prices are increasing. Well, we need to explain to the whole of West Northamptonshire for a start, but the explanation is relatively simple. Inflation hits this council just as much as it hits everywhere else. And if we want to do the right thing by our staff, by putting in wage rises that are required, if we want to meet the inflationary increases in the contracts that we have in relation to our services, if we want to meet our net zero ambitions, then we need to do we need to take these decisions in order to meet those financial obligations. I think it was Councillor Stone who raised the question of raising revenue from elsewhere. Well, we do so already, and we have ambitions to go further, especially in my area around sport and leisure, and I know also in relation to economic development and the visitor economy. We have an awful lot of work in the pipeline that will raise more funds locally, but we also do that via our treasury management strategy. It's quite an important piece of work that's done by our officers in order to prop up certain parts of the budget. I think it's about £1.5 million comes in through the astute management of our investments, and we need to be careful when we look at potentially tinkering with that to ensure that we don't upset the financial stability of this council.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. And I think most points have been answered. Just to add to that point, of course, on council tax increase, look, everybody is seeing increasing costs at the supermarket, fuel, energy and so on. So nobody would want to take money off people unless it was absolutely necessary. You've seen the level of savings that have been made. This is not taking the money off the taxpayer whilst not bothering to find efficiencies. There's huge efficiencies and savings being made in operation, avoiding, although the word's been used by a member of our speakers a number of times, avoiding cuts in services. I think the other thing to remember, though, and this is real, lived in living memory, isn't it? Amongst a number of things that happened at the county council, there was a time when they were applauded for continuing to keep the council tax down with zero increases, applauded by local taxpayers, applauded by the government, who actually encouraged that at the time. But when the time came, the lack of compound increases on that council tax is one of the reasons why we've been through the pain of the reorganisation that we've been through. And everybody knows that, whatever political side you're on. So we have to face people, look them in the eye. We have to promise them we're doing the best we possibly can to deliver value. But we can't give them nonsense stories about, you don't need to pay an increase. We know that's the reality of the world with 10% inflation and the recent history. We've got to be honest with them, and the best way to do that is to take this increase, which we otherwise wouldn't want to do. I think these are most of those points swept up. And I thank everybody, our speakers and everybody for those comments. I think it's really constructive discussion. Are there any other points to come in on this at all? No. In which case, as always, our recommendations at section 3. Can I just ask the council to approve those recommendations? The cabinet, are those agreed? Thank you. That's great. Takes us then on to our last item, which is the draft housing revenue account. After our speakers, we'll have 2 people comment. Malcolm will comment on the financial side. The report's in Adam's name, so we'll bring him in after Malcolm on the housing aspect of this. Our 3 speakers are, first of all, Councillor McCord, then Councillor Beardsworth, then Councillor Stone. Councillor McCord is happy not to speak. Councillor Beardsworth, are you still speaking on this one?
Just a very quick one, Chair.
Thank you.
Having read through the proposal's description, I was reading about the rent increase options in line with the government's rent policy, maximum increase capped at 7%. Now, as we discussed earlier today, we know a lot of people that live in council houses do have some form of benefit.
Yeah.
But I do find it ironic that at the moment the government won't meet with the nurses to discuss a pay policy, and yet is quite prepared to put a 7% increase up for our lowest paid people in the country, because there's whatever benefits you get, it will take something away from the money you have left in your pocket to spend. So I'm a bit cross with the government at the moment, because I think they should be, if they're talking about a 7% increase to council tenants, then they should at least be talking to the nurses and other trade unions about increasing their offer to counter this large jump. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councillor Stone, Danielle.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions, really. Rent increase is going to go up by 7%. 80% of tenants get housing benefit, but 20% is still a lot of people who are going to feel the pinch, aren't they? One of the things that really impressed me over COVID, Chair, was the welfare services provided to local people by NPH. And during the extreme weather, the heat, I was able to phone up NPH and ask for welfare checks to be made on some of my residents. I was really, really impressed by the response to that. So I'm just thinking, you know, as part of the management negotiate, the cost for management next year, we ought to be included welfare, because I think a lot of our housing staff are really on the front line. They understand what's going on in communities really, really well. And they should be, as well as doing their main job, you know, they are our ears and eyes out in the community. And I think we ought to be recognising that a little bit more. One of the questions I wanted to ask, it bothers me so much I can't tell you. With the right to buy, our housing stock has been halved, more than halved. We've got less than half of what we used to have 10, 12, 14 years ago. Do we know how much of that stock that we've lost is now in the hands of private landlords? I know, for example, that in some areas of London, we've got whole estates now run by private landlords. I don't know quite how that happens. But I'm just wondering who the net beneficiaries of that policy are. And I think we ought to know that in Spring Burrows, for example, private landlords own some of those flats and are charging the most extortionate rents for them. I just wondered if we had any of our own intelligence around that. And one of the other things I just wanted to ask, a friend of mine is soon going to be giving up her adapted house to go into supported housing. And her preference would be to sell her house to us because it's already got a lift in the house and all the kind of adaptations people need. But I'm told we don't have a policy that enables us to do that. And I think that's a shame. So I just wanted to flag that up with you.
Thank you. I think most of those issues are more on the housing side, actually. So if he's happy to, I'll hand to Adam. Just quickly on the matter, not to be pedantic, because I think we all feel that losing the houses going through the right to buy disadvantages what we're trying to do in terms of rented and so on. But obviously, with the 14 years, we've averaged lost 120 to right to buy. So that's nowhere near halving. We're still left with 12,000. I just felt I need to comment on that, but nevertheless, it does see a reduction. There is some budget for spot purchase properties, but they're normally ex-local authority, aren't they? On that last point, Adam, and perhaps we'll come back more on that. But over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'll cover the points raised. First, in terms of the maximum increase, I'm not going to talk about nurses, I'm afraid. So Councillor Bearsworth, I have the greatest respect for them. 2 generations of my family were in nursing, but they've got nothing to do with the decisions that we're making here today. Yes, 7% is a significant increase, but as Councillor Stone has already pointed out, 70 to 80% of our tenants are protected from that increase, but by virtue of the fact that they receive housing benefit. The other 20%, if you look at the recommendation 2.8, we are going to set up a housing fund for people who need financial assistance. That was something agreed with in discussions with NPH. I pushed hard for that myself in the context of having to apply that 7% increase, but it's a very similar situation to that which we encounter when we consider council tax increases. If we don't take the 7% increase now, then we miss out financially forevermore because we don't receive the compound increases in years to come. So in order to be able to do all the sorts of things that Councillor Stone asks for and all the sorts of things that residents expect of us, such as keeping up an adequate maintenance programme of our housing stock, we need that money in the bank, but we will look to protect our residents wherever we can. In terms of the right to buy stock, right to buy, has a decimating effect on the housing stock. There's no escaping that. I've made my feelings very well known in the past about my opinions on right to buy, but in terms of looking at where that stock ends up, no, sorry, Councillor Stone, it will get us nowhere. We might find out that it's in the hands of certain people, but we can't change right to buy. We carry out thorough checks when people seek to exercise their right to buy. We also have the ability and the right to buy back right to buy purchases under certain circumstances set out in the legislation. We do so wherever we can, but I do believe that the kind of work you're asking us to do would lead us nowhere other than down a blind alley. In terms of the person that you know who's seeking to sell their adapted home, we have a specific budget for acquisitions under the HRA. So if your friend wishes to approach the council, I'm sure our housing team would be very interested in entering into negotiations with her to purchase that adapted property. Those sorts of properties, larger family properties, they were always in short supply, and we've always got a long waiting list of people waiting to go into them. So when we come to moving the recommendations, Mr. Chairman, there's a slight tweak to 2.8 that I'd like to make, because I think it slightly preempts the outcome of the consultation. We just need to be slightly more open-ended than how it's set out in the report. But other than that, I'll hand back to Malcolm for the financial specifics. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Malcolm, did you want, excuse me,
Yeah.
did you want to make any comments?
Yeah, just two very brief points, really. The first is that just to point out that the outcome of the last year for this area is that we actually we overspent by 0.6 million on maintenance, and that's a lot to do with the inflationary situation we're finding ourselves in, but also we actually under borrowed such that we actually saved 1.4 million on the interest rate. So we actually ended up, under budget. And you can put that down primarily to lack of materials, and we didn't want to do this, and also to the inflationary environment we find ourselves in. So the net effect of that, and what significance of this is, that we've reprogrammed the capital program to reflect that situation. So if you're looking at that, because to reflect what we believe to be reality. The welfare check, I'll just couple on that. I would certainly hope they would be doing that, Danielle. Certainly would hope that. But also the one point I would say that, and it never ceases to surprise me, we have you all know we do have a hardship fund, and the uptake of that is trivial. I never ceases to surprise me, but I would just mention it again. So Chair, that's all I've got to add here, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Was there anybody else looking to comment at all on this? No, thank you. In which case, I'll go back to Adam. You were going to make a suggested amendment on recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman. I will email Democratic Services immediately after the meeting so that they've got precise wording, but for the benefit of the tape and for members around the table, it's recommendation 2.8 that I'm seeking to amend. Just after facing difficulties, I'll be deleting the rest of that wording. And so it will read to provide help for tenants facing financial difficulties rather than arising from energy and food poverty, which I think is a bit prescriptive at this stage. The hardship contingent budget will simply put the tenants facing financial difficulties. The task that I've set officers is that that hardship budget will primarily be focused towards those people who will face the rent increase because they're not in receipt of housing benefit. We're very mindful of the fact that some of those people are in low paid work, and despite in cash terms to some of us the £6.79 increase a week doesn't seem much. If you're on a very, very tight budget, £30 over the course of a month amounts to quite a lot of money. So it's that cohort that I would seek to protect, but we will go out to consultation, and I certainly will be very interested in seeing the results of that consultation, and I'll read the responses thoroughly.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent amendment. It doesn't matter whether it's rising from energy, food poverty, although it likely will be. It's just for help for tenants facing financial difficulties. Yeah, great. Subject to that amendment, then can I just ask the Cabinet to confirm their agreement to those recommendations? Is that agreed? Jolly good. Thank you very much. That was our last item, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance this evening. Thanks to all the officers, particularly the finance team. We've done huge work on all these papers. We may not see you before, so we'll take the opportunity to wish you a very happy Christmas as well. Thank you, everybody.